Hi everybody, Jed Ayres here, and welcome to another episode of The Attic. As you may know, it was an attic in Bremen, Germany, this attic in fact, where IGEL got its first start 20 years ago. A whole host of famous tech companies started in humble places like attics and garages. Of course, with Facebook, it was a dorm room. HP and Amazon started in a garage. And visiting us today in the attic is a very special guest. No stranger to many of you in the end-user computing space, the legendary blogger, Brian Madden. Brian Madden is the lead technologist in VMware's EUC office of the CTO. And prior to joining VMware, he was a very well-known independent EUC expert, a blogger, a founder of BrianMadden.com, and of course, the Bri Forum conference series. Brian's been the source of a massive amount of conversation and debate about VDI and desktop as a service. He's the author of 6 books and over 2,000 technical articles. So hey Brian, thank you so much for joining us here in the attic. I know you and I have a long history together. I think we met each other back in the early 2000s. Of course, I was a religious attender of your Bri Forum conferences and always read, BrianMadden.com every week. But yeah, and then I guess, we reconnected when you had sort of dropped out of end user compute, and I tracked you down in Florida. I think you were fishing off your porch and happily unemployed. And I pulled you back into our Disrupt conference in Austin, and we can talk more about that and obviously your great journey into VMware. But since this is the attic, we want to talk about Brian Madden and kind of your origin story. I'd love to start with just kind of where you grew up and how you got into tech and what you were like as a kid. So we can start all the way back at the beginning.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Jed, thank you so much for the invitation. To your audience, thank you all for watching. It's fun to not talk about VDI and end user computing for an hour or so.
Exactly.
So I grew up in Akron, Ohio. Go Buckeyes! OH. I'm actually a huge Browns fan. I was a typical kid. I'm 43, born late 70s. I was into taking things apart. I was that kid that I wasn't a computer nerd as a kid because we didn't have a computer. My first computer was a Texas Instruments TI-99-4A, for anyone who remembers that. That computer was from 1983, although I didn't get it until about 6th grade or so. But my mom raised us. My dad was a concrete foreman, so there wasn't a lot of computer education for my parents on this kind of thing, but they very much encouraged all of us. I've got 3 siblings to be creative and explore. And I was that kid with the screwdriver who always took everything apart.
So were you you're the
toaster.
oldest or the youngest, or which one are you? Where are you on the
I'm
spectrum?
the oldest.
The oldest. Okay.
There is, and my youngest brother actually works at VMware. Jack Madden.
Yes.
He's written a few books, and some coworkers with him now. And there's a brother and a sister in between.
Okay.
But yeah, I was a kid taking things apart, and kind of one step led to another, and I got this old XT computer and 4.77 megahertz 8088, and learned GW Basic and programming and that sort of stuff. And I just sort of liked computers, and then one thing kind of led to another. By the time high school rolled around, I had a job scooping ice cream at a Baskin Robbins, and I was making like $3 an hour or whatever it was back then, but I was sort of really into computers, and I made these brochures, these little tri-fold brochures that sat on the counter at Baskin Robbins saying like, hey, do you need computer help? Don't go to a big box retailer. You need some independent college kid, I was really in high school, to come to your house and fix your computer. And in these days, this was hooking up printers.
You were Geek Squad before Geek Squad.
I was. Yeah. And what's funny, I should see if I can dig up these brochures because it was very persuasive. I mean, I was like, do not go to a big box retailer. They just want to sell you what they want to sell you to make money. I will tell you what you need, not what a vendor wants you to buy, which is funny because there's so much of that, BrianMadden.com moxie that was even in the early 90s when I was scooping ice cream. And that led, I really got a fair amount of business from that. While I was in high school, I was charging $15 an hour in those days. That was more money than God, as far as I was concerned at that point.
I would imagine that was probably 3 times what you were making per hour at Baskin Robbins, right?
I think it was like 5 times.
Yeah.
And it was cash too. Right. So I actually stopped going to high school. Like I started doing more and more getting sick a little bit, and then like sneaking out of the house to go do computer consulting. And it was, I was drilling holes in concrete walls, running coax cable for Lantastic. I was doing like Novell NetWare stuff, all sorts of things. And frankly, one thing led to another. That was in like 94, 95. Gosh, it's now 2021. It's pretty much, that's it. Now we're here. You're caught up.
It feels like you were always someone that's very inquisitive. You're almost like self-taught. I think that's part of your bio almost, right? Is that you're someone that figures things out.
Yeah, and I didn't go to college, so I didn't take that traditional education route. But we all follow those who came in front of us, right? We all stand on the shoulders of the generations before us. And so in the 1980s, it was all books in the library and buying books on computer graphics. And there was, pages and pages and pages of basic programs. And I'm like copying them in, typing them line by line by line by line to like draw a ray traced wine glass or something, on the computer, like just a wire form, whatever. And just reading a lot of books. And then it led to, as I started working in the late 90s, the knowledge was disseminated by CD-ROM, like the TechNet CDs, remember those from Microsoft and MSDN and everything. And so as I sort of just learned more and more about IT and my profession, I recognized that I had that gift of the education from all those who came before me, who wrote and shared what they knew, and I wanted to do the same thing. And that's what led me to writing my first book, which was like 20 years ago. To this day, I started writing that first book. It's literally February of 2001.
Really? And so what was this book, Brian?
It was called Citrix Metaframe XP Advanced Technical Design Guide, including Feature Release 1.
That's a real catchy title.
Rolls off the tongue. The way my first exposure to the EUC community, of course we call it thin client computing back then, it was Jim Kenzig. He ran that listserv called the Thin List.
Okay.
I think the website was like thethin.net. It was one of those Yahoo groups, right? So it was like a 4,000 person party line email. You write one email to this list and everyone gets it.
Right.
And that's where, like Ron Oglesby, who's one of my coworkers now at VMware, a lot of us kind of old school folks, a lot of folks from IGEL now, currently, like Doug Brown, all these folks, like this is where we coalesced back in the 90s. And that was the community. And so when I started writing this book, I sent chapters out to people on that listserv. I asked if there's anyone who wanted to review it and have ideas and feedback and all that kind of thing. And I realized, I did some quick math, and I realized I only needed to sell 700 copies of this book to break even. And it was on Amazon. That's all you need, right? I wanted to write the book that picked up where the manual left off.
Right.
So I was assuming that everyone who picked up my book, they read the manual, how to use Citrix. They can click, 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 and install and get some connections and that kind of stuff. But how do you design it? What's the philosophy behind all the decisions you have to make? I was doing consulting in those days, so I had done a lot of Citrix projects. I had a lot of experience just walking people through, well, you can set up printing this way or this way, profiles, here's security, performance tuning, so all of that kind of stuff. It was very, teaching the reader how to fish, right, rather than giving them the fish.
Right.
There wasn't screenshots, it wasn't a how-to guide, it was just how to think about deploying Citrix in your world. And that book was very successful. That book became before the website, frankly. It wasn't until I'd done that book, I did an update to that book. Terminal Server, Microsoft had built Terminal Server into Windows 2003 at that point. And so Ron Oglesby and I then wrote a Terminal Server version of that book, so not Citrix, just pure terminal services a couple years later. And I was working for Compaq and then HP at that time, and I kind of had the idea, I was making money on books, and I didn't know what I wanted to do exactly, but like the Citrix sort of book writing stuff was more fun to me than my day job consulting for a giant company. So I left HP with the idea that I was going to finish that Terminal Server book I was writing with Ron and then just get a job somewhere else. And then 15 years went by.
So you were at Compaq when it merged with HP. And then
I was, okay. Yeah. As a matter of fact, the day they announced that merger was the day I was interviewing at Compaq. So this is like 2001, right? Okay. So this is before mobile internet, right? Before BlackBerries, before all these kinds of things. I remember I'm sitting in the lobby of Compaq, about to meet the person who's interviewing me, and Gabe Knuth, my best friend, another guy who's now at VMware with me. Gabe calls me, and he's like, dude, you're gonna work at HP. And I'm like, nah, man, my interview today is at Compaq. He's like, no, HP's buying Compaq. And for those of you who are in the industry this time, that's insane. That's like Ford buying GM.
Right.
Like there was IBM, Dell, HP, and Compaq. At least in the US, those are the four big server vendors, hardware makers. The idea that one would buy the other is ludicrous.
Right.
So I definitely knew that Gabe was pulling my leg.
Especially when you're sitting in the lobby of their.
And you can't look on your phone to check it, right? Like how do you? And like my interview's coming up, and I'm like, I didn't quite know how to play it. What I ended up doing is going to the guard at the front desk, kind of, nonchalantly sort of, so how about that HP news today? And he's like, oh, can you believe it? Wow, what is this about? And I'm like, okay, so this is legit. And then the elevator door bings open, and the guy who would be my boss, guy named Jeff Goldstein, awesome guy. He walks to the elevator and is like, well, I don't even know if we need to do this interview. And I'm like, that's what you want out of the first words of you.
So you still had the
interview.
It wasn't but then that job, you never got this job? And that was how you ended up going somewhere else?
Yeah, no, so I did end up getting that job because I think he just said it like, I don't know what our future is, whatever. But so I went to Compaq through HP, all that sort of stuff. And around that time, I had these books. I was getting more and more well known because the books were pretty popular, and I was invited to, other conferences to speak and going to iForums and speaking at iForum and different Citrix user groups and things like that. And so one thing led to another, and I decided I wanted to leave HP and do something that's more focused on Citrix and this this world that we live in now. So I left. The idea when I left was I was going to launch a blog, which, by the way, blogs, this is 2003 now. Like there was no blog software. If you wanted a blog, you wrote the blog engine yourself. And I had the brianmadden.com website. I had that domain. I knew I wanted it to be on brianmadden.com because I wanted to brand myself, which very much the right decision. Not my decision. We walk on the shoulders of those in front of us. We stand on the shoulders in front of us. Tom Peters had the brand U phenomena of the kind of mid to late 90s. And it was like Michael Hammer and Tom Peters and all these, the days of McKinsey and, Bain and all these like really cool consulting sort of strategy shops. And they're like, you are a brand. Even if you're Bob in accounting, you're the brand, that kind of thing.
Right. So you, of course, went out and bought your brianmadden.com and you read this book.
Exactly. Well, when I read that right back in the 90s, so I had registered the domain, it didn't do anything.
Right.
And so I wrote my own blog engine for that and kind of started the blog. I was really like, I'm going to have a blog about thin client computing. Yeah. And, like I said, and one thing led to another, and I never ended up getting a job anywhere.
So what point did you realize that this could be its own company, brianmadden.com?
It's like a lot of things. So it was making money, and I was making money selling the books and stuff too. And I just didn't get around to getting a job.
How did you end up doing Bri Forum? Or what was this catalyst for the events?
The events. So of course, Bri Forum in those days, Citrix had their main conference called iForum.
Right.
And it was always in Orlando in the early days.
Swan
it was
and Dolphin.
Dolphin and Swan. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And remember those moments, man? Like hang out in those bars and that sort of like. There's that pathway in between the two hotels, and there's the bars there, and just meeting all these people who you only know online and you only know through the internet and stuff. And it was just such a great vibe. But as iForum grew and grew, it was very much a Citrix vendor conference. And so it was, which is fine. They're a vendor. I mean, VMworld is a vendor conference too. I've got no problem with that. Right. But I felt there was more of there was opportunity for an independent conference. Because I thought because in those days, Citrix, they were reviewing your slides. I did something about printing, and I had a joke slide about like printing being challenging in Citrix, and they made me take that out of my presentation. Right. And I'm like, folks, the print, come on, really? It was very much like, it was kind of like marketing fluff. I mean, it was a good conference, but it was all Citrix worldview. No other perspectives were allowed. They filtered everything. And I was like, but the conference was getting bigger and bigger, and I'm like, there's an opportunity here for like an independent iForum. And I remember I was actually at iForum at one of these Dolphin and Swan. I told you about that thin list, that email distribution list. Mm-hmm. All of us who were participating on the thin list, we would plan to go to like Shula's one night, and it'd be like 40 people in that room. And we all got together very informally. We hoped that some vendor was in the room with us so they could pay for our 40 steak dinners. And I remember just, in that thing, just kind of talking, and I'm like, man, I think I'm gonna do it. I call it one of my Jan Brady moments because it's like, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Yeah, I'm making a conference. It's Brian's iForum, huzzah! And I think I actually give Ron Oglesby the credit for this, and I don't know if history can correct me, but I think it was Ron Oglesby who said, "Dude, BriForum," and the whole room kind of laughs. And then later on, I'm like, "What? Okay, I want to do this conference. I don't know how to do it. Like, figure it out. But I didn't know how to write a book. I didn't know how to write a blog. Yeah, I can figure it out." And but I was looking at other names like SBC World, Thin Client Computing Conference, these kinds of things, and everyone's like, "Dude, you have to call it BriForum." And I'm like, "We cannot call it BriForum. That's ridiculous." And they're like, "Seriously, you have to call it BriForum." And in hindsight, thank goodness I did, because BriForum is a generic brand that doesn't have a technology in its name.
Right.
So if I would have called it like SBC World, well, 2 years later we would have called it Thin Client World, then Utility Computing World, then Mobile Management. The everything changes. But BriForum could be BriForum.
Yeah, that's great. We even had that problem with Disrupt, right? Because the original Disrupt we did was really around end user computing, and then we're like, well, we really want this to be a conversation about cloud. So we changed the tagline to a cloud forum, cloud workspaces forum. So yeah, you tie yourself to technology, you're subject to Moore's law, right?
Yeah, and the good news is like Disrupt is a great name because that you can change the tagline each year.
Right.
And I probably did have a different tagline for BriForum every year, but the name, the domain, the brand was consistent. And we did BriForum 20 times. 20 times over about 16 years.
My question for you would be sort of, obviously along the way you get a lot of advice about how to do things or why to do things. I'm sure there's some advice that you ignored. Anything that sticks out for you in terms of, when people either tell you you can't do something or to do something and you take the opposite. I'd love any stories you have like that, because I imagine Brian Madden, as the contrarian, has a few stories.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I didn't know. No one told me I couldn't do anything. Love my parents. I grew up in a very fortunate place. I was born in the U.S. in the late 70s in a middle class neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
I had a lot. I didn't have a lot to worry about as a kid. My parents were great. They encouraged. They encouraged us to be whatever we wanted to be and pursue what we wanted to pursue. So at no point did anyone tell me, you can't make a conference, you can't quit a book, you can't, even when I dropped out of college. My mom, if you talk to her now, she's kind of like reminiscing, she's like, I figured you would be fine, whatever. Right. Everything, the websites, the conference, the books, at no point did I ever feel like I couldn't do it. We figured it out as I go along. Mm-hmm. The advice that I give to people, and this is kind of like this is nothing new you're hearing for the first time, like Steve Jobs and lots of people talk about this. I did no market research on anything I did ever. I only created the products that I wanted to exist in the world. Mm-hmm. So the articles on brianmadden.com that I wrote the articles I thought would be interesting, like that I would want to read as someone who is in this industry. When I wrote my first book, I wrote the book that I wanted to read. Mm-hmm. When I created BriForum, I created the conference that I wanted to exist. And at no point was I worried about, well, is the market going to like this? It was just like, I thought, I'm probably, if like I'm an IT geek and I am into it for these reasons, I'm sure at least some other people are. And what's cool is, I wasn't trying to conquer the world. Right. As I get older now, I realize I do not have a competitive bone in my body. I'm not cut out to be a business person. I don't want to take down our competition. I don't hate anyone. That's all. So like BriForum was like 400 people, and maybe 400 to 500 people. It was always a smaller conference. It never was over 500 people for any BriForum.
Right. Which was part of the charm of it, right? It was, you actually had a conversation. It was intimate.
And like I couldn't imagine. I mean, a 20,000 person conference, I would die of anxiety, heart attacks before that happened. It's like the parable of the poor fisherman. Which Google it. We won't go into it now. But I had this conference. It was everything I wanted. It was 500 people. It's like, oh, you should grow this even more to 1,000. I'm like, why? It's like, well, because then you can, make more money. I'm like, why? I have enough money to live on. Like, I pay my bills. What do I need more money for? That just sounds like more trouble. It's like, well, but then you can make it. Why? So I think that was the thing for me. Even on the growth, on everything I did what I wanted to do for me, and I did it as long as it was fun.
So you
And when it
eventually
stopped,
sold BrianMadden.com to TechTarget, right?
I
That
did,
was
yeah.
what, 15 years in?
2008, TechTarget came knocking, and we weren't for sale. I mean, the business was a lifestyle business, right? It was me, my best friend Gabe, my brother Jack, my friend Emily, my friend Nicole. Like it was 5 of us friends in this company, and it was like life was pretty good. And TechTarget said, we're interested in like buying you. Do you want to talk about this? And I'm like, well, I at least knew that to say yes. And they invited us to Boston in their boardroom and everything. I remember I brought Gabe with me also. It's like, just back me up in case they say anything. I need to remember what they say later. And the CEO of TechTarget puts his feet up on the desk, leans back, and says, "We want to take that grunt work off your plate so that you two guys can focus on what you do best." And it took every ounce of strength that Gabe had to hold me back from being like, sold right there.
I think
Selling for
he
the
wanted you to go
free
back to
lattes.
writing and doing what you love, right? So I'm sure at that
Yeah.
point you had gotten to the size where you were dealing with a
Yeah,
lot
and it was great because TechTarget took over the mechanical production of Bri Forum. They took over the operations of BrianMadden.com. So I no longer would be like my pager would not go off in the middle of the night if the website went down like it would when it was my company.
Right.
I didn't have to worry about average days outstanding of accounts receivables and if we can make payroll this month and all of the things that those who own businesses have to worry about. And so that was 2008. They bought us.
Right. I guess that when they bought you, it got blurry because the name didn't change and you just kept doing what you
The
were
site
doing.
didn't change, the logos didn't change, like it, and they were very good, like, because I was asking, like, are we still going to be able to be independent and write our own story? And TechTarget is, I mean, they're a very like legit media company, and they had that kind of church and state advertising and editorial separation, and they were like, oh yeah, like we are buying you because you built all this, like we are not going to break that, like why we should just light our money on fire if that was the case.
Right.
And and they had my back. Like there was a couple times when vendors who were customers of TechTarget advertisers were very upset at articles that I wrote.
Right.
And there's a couple times when the upper management at TechTarget had to go be yelled at by customers. And but they have my back. They're like, well, Brian's, like I remember actually VMware was one of them. I remember my boss was going into a meeting to get yelled at by VMware because of some article I'd written, and he just calls me. He's like, hey, Brian, is that the article you wrote about VMware? Like, that's legit, right? Like you weren't like drunk or stoned or anything when you wrote that. Like you stand behind that. I'm like, oh yeah. He goes, okay, cool, thanks. That was
it.
End of conversation, and it was great.
So Brian, I know that in 2016 you stepped away from tech and you spent more than a year traveling around the U.S., living in a van with a flip phone. Tell us what this reset was like and what you learned about yourself and about tech.
Well, as you know, when small companies are bought by large companies, the large companies look for economies of scale, like rack them and stack them and stamp them out, right? So, they put me on the road speaking all over the world, and I was doing 50 or 60 speeches a year, which is great. But, 50 or 60 speeches around the year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and it's like, oh, another Citrix Synergy, another VMworld, another Microsoft, whatever. I was writing the same article year after year after, right? Like, here's what's new, live blog coverage, check out our podcast. It got to be sort of the same thing over and over again. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I had that fork in the road because of the way my contract was. It was gonna like re-up for multiple years. And I'm like, I don't know what's next, but I know I don't want to just do this for another 5 years. So we're in middle 16 at this point. I was living in San Francisco. I've been there about a decade. At that point, I sold my house in San Francisco, and just the girl I was with at the time, we did a camper van. We drove around a little bit. We spent some time in Florida. I ended up in New York, kind of all over the place. And that's the time, of course, when I kind of reconnected with you.
I think I found you in Florida. It took some legwork actually because I remember I had last seen you in San Francisco, and then I knew you had bought a apartment in Manhattan. But then somebody told me you're in Florida, and you don't have an email. You didn't have a smartphone. I think you had a burner phone.
That's correct. Yeah, yeah.
And I found you, and yeah, you were happily fishing off your porch and living in a little town in Florida.
That place in Florida. You could drop the line right off the back deck, right in the water.
And I had the audacity to ask you to come back and give a speech. and I told you, I think if you remember, I said, I don't care what it's about. I just want you to show up. Do you remember this?
I absolutely remember that. And interestingly, this is why I work at VMware now,
Right.
because of that speech. So this is like end of 2017. I think IGEL Disrupt was like that year. It was like February of 2018.
Right.
And you had it said, talk about whatever you want. And I said, well, I've been working on this pinball stuff and kind of doing some like IoT pinball type things. And you're like, oh, we're getting into IoT. Why don't you, we call it IoT, not like edge computing or whatever it is now.
Right.
And you said, well, why don't you give a talk about IoT? And I was like, I think IoT is kind of BS. And this whole like IT professionals don't need to care about IoT, at least not in the way that everyone thinks it is. And you're like, that's perfect. That's your speech.
Yeah, which I remember. I think you basically said why I think IoT is stupid or something like this.
Yeah, and I did it like
entertaining.
It's still on YouTube. If you search for Brian Madden disrupts IoT, or you'll find it. It's
Right.
IoT for IT or something like that. The IT Professional's Guide to IoT or whatever. It's actually a decent talk. I mean, still relevant today.
Yeah.
But I did that at that time I was kind of getting bored of not working, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I agree with you to go to Disrupt. I think it was in Austin that year. This is
It was
February
at
of 18.
AMD's headquarters.
Yeah, and walking down the hall as I'm there, I see Sean Bass, who is, I mean, he's a Broadform speaker. He's a friend of mine for like 20 years. He is the end user computing CTO at VMware. And I'm like, and I remember at this point, I'm not working for like 2 years. So I'm kind of
Right.
like off the radar. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what's going on? We probably hugged because that's what you did in
Right.
like before
Pre-COVID.
2020. And, and I remember the two of us went to dinner to kind of catch up. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna go work at AWS. And here's, all this kind of stuff. And he was very supportive. But then the next day, he texted me. He's like, great to catch up. I just got to put it out there. I would be remiss if I didn't try to get you into VMware. But at this point, I had wanted to move to like work at a cool company, right? Like I was getting ready to go to Amazon or Google or something like that. And then I'm like, VMware? God, I guess. I don't know. So, but he's like, look, just check out what we're doing. I think you'll be impressed. I talked to Gabe and Jack, who were still at brianmadden.com at that time. They loved VMware's EUC strategy. Everyone I talked to at VMware was so excited about their strategy. VMware was starting to make some real traction against Citrix, some real traction against Microsoft. They were doing the whole Workspace ONE platform thing. They're managing physical Windows 10 machines, so kind of taking on SCCM from a competitive standpoint. All that intelligence, they just bought Apptelligent and all this sort of machine learning intelligence stuff. I mean, it was cool, and they charmed me. I mean, I went to Atlanta, I went to Palo Alto, and just got tours what they were working on and all this kind of stuff, and I was blown away.
So it's been 3 years now you've been there?
Yeah, it'll be 3 years next month.
Wow.
So because this is but it really, all roads lead back to IGEL Disrupt. So to you watching, good things happen when you go to IGEL Disrupt.
One of the biggest compliments people give us about Disrupt actually is that it feels a lot like Briform. And in fact, it's next week actually. We're doing it digitally, and of course it's this commentary where I'm channeling a little bit of my Brian Madden, which is, this isn't an IGEL commercial. It's really meant to bring, the community together to have a conversation. Yes, we host it. We normally pay for the steak dinners and, try to facilitate a logical agenda, but we try not to make it a overt IGEL, commercial. So it really is about this community. And I think you probably know Doug Brown, who obviously has a strangely parallel life to yours in terms of Midwest boy who became a writer and ended up as part of this community, and through his blog and his books, he's now curating the IGEL community, right? Which is an astounding thing, right? It's not the Yahoo user group of 2000, but it's Slack, and it's over 5,000 people, having hundreds of conversations every single day. It's amazing.
I was on Doug's podcast late last year, and he, as far as I can tell, I mean, he is, he's like 50 now, but I think he still doesn't sleep. He just works. He's on. He's doing it. He's in his element.
Yeah, he is. He, I think, always wanted to be in Germany. He fell in love with a beautiful German girl, got married, and yeah, the IGEL job and the IGEL community, which I really do believe is sort of like carrying on this special, social network of the dark arts of end user compute and the conversation. And I know we'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about, where you've been so opinionated about VDI and desktop as a service and, this space for so long. I'd be interested now that you spent 3 years at VMware and after COVID with a billion people working at home, kind of how do you see this technology today?
So VDI, taking a step back, of course, I wrote a book along with Gabe and Jack called the Vdi Delusion.
Right.
And this is 9 years ago. And in that book, the core premise, this book was not called Brian Hates VDI. It was called the Vdi Delusion. And the subtitle was something along the lines of like, basically like this VDI technology was great, but it is not the be all end all. Like VDI is not the future and the only direction for technology. The future of end user computing is not VDI. It includes VDI, but my argument was that VDI is just a delivery form factor, right? So some of your applications and workloads are Windows, some are Mac, some are web, some are mobile, some are all these different sort of form factors of applications. For the Windows applications and Windows desktops, there are lots of different ways that you can deliver those. You can put them on a laptop, you can stream it, you can have it running in a data center and remote the pixels like a VDI. So VDI is part of your complete end user computing environment. And of course, there should be VDI specialists. There should be VDI conferences. There should be, it's like the car, right? I talk about like VDI is like an alternator. There are nerds who nerd out on alternators, and I'm sure there's alternator design conferences, and they go to it and they talk about the future of alternators and everything. But no one is saying this is the year of the alternator, right? It's like, no, it's a Honda Civic. And so VDI is a core critical piece of infrastructure and a core component of a modern day EUC platform. But VDI is sort of just one piece of that. And that's the reason I am at VMware right now, because VMware is not a one-trick pony when it comes to end-user computing. As I said, we're looking at delivering VDI, but also managing physical devices, physical Windows, physical Mac, iOS, Android, web apps, all the security, the zero trust, the intelligence, automation, secure tunnel, SASE. It's all fitting together, and you can't like pick and choose. Oh, like we only want to support this one or whatever. I mean, from a customer standpoint, users now, to your point, they work where they work, when they work, on whatever device they have, and we in IT need to make sure that we can deliver, the apps, the data, the services they need that are secure, reliable, performant, et cetera. And so, to me, that was the message from VMware. It was more nascent, of course, when I joined them 3 years ago, but we've been building that and improving. It's agile software, Workspace ONE. There's updates to it every month, and it's just iterates and iterates and iterates. And we saw when the pandemic happened and everyone left the offices very quickly. That was our day to shine. Yep. It was EUC's turn to be like in the glory position within IT, because end user computing for so long was like, oh, you're like the desktop people. Like, oh, you hook up the phone? Yeah, my grandma does that. What do you do? Like, why do we need you? And all of a sudden we were cool.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. It like suddenly overnight became the highest priority. So what does your job look like today, Brian? Like, I know you were hired to kind of help evangelize the Workspace ONE platform. You were flying all over the world. Like, what are you doing today now that you're, I assume, landlocked and like all of us working from home?
Yeah, you're looking at it. I sit here in my chair and talk into the camera. That's my job. You're caught up. It's so yeah, when I first joined VMware, so I work in the CTO office, and so I'm able, I talk to a lot of customers, I listen to a lot of customers, I talk to partners. I'm doing a lot of speeches and a lot of presentations and a lot of like webcasts and podcasts and this kind of stuff. But product managers will reach out like, hey, we're thinking about this. What do you think? I go in the meetings to talk about roadmaps and future and vision and strategy. I look at our stories a little bit, like from the product marketing. How do we tell the story? What's the story arc? What's the flow? How do we get people excited? Like long-term bigger bets, M&A type stuff. It's really a very interesting position.
I mean, honestly, that it sounds like a culmination of a lot of the skills that you've acquired. I mean, do you consider this a dream position for yourself?
Two best things about my job is I do not have quota, and I do not have any direct reports.
Yeah.
So I am an individual contributor. It's just me doing my thing. I told Sean from before we even hired, I said, by the way, I want to be an IC, and that's it. I do not want to be CTO someday. I do not want to be manager. I do not want to be GM. I don't want to be SVP. I don't want to be VP. I don't like. That's all.
And you haven't
like,
had to buy a suit, and you well, your hair's not red right now, but you you still maintain some personality.
Yeah, I mean, they're you know, I still use my own templates with all my slides and you know all that kind of stuff. So I think again, at the end of the day, you know, by the time even when I joined VMware, I had been doing this for like 23, 24 years. I had done everything I did. I think they recognize. They're like, you just go do your thing.
Go be Brian.
And you know, let us know what you need. It's also kind of fun to be part of a big machine. Like end user computing is just one of the business units at VMware. So we have all of our other colleagues, you know, doing like the network virtualization and the multi-cloud and all the intrinsic security and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of cool to get a little, like peel back the curtain a little bit into some of these other areas too.
It feels like, at least from the outside, it looks like a very positive place to work. Certainly, I've visited your campus a lot of times, and I know no one's going there at this point, probably, or very few people, but beautiful campus. It feels like a company that does care about its employees, cares about its community. I would assume that you feel
Yeah,
that.
I agree with that. And it's, you know, this is again one of those things that it's so easy to chalk it up to just like platitudes. Like we have our epic values, you know, about they all stand for something. I don't even know what it is. Like
it's like epic squared, right? I think it's something.
Yeah, because there's two C's in there, and but whatever. But like that's it. But they really do live it.
Mm-hmm.
They really do live it, and you know, it's a very sort of open door policy. You know, like people you can approach, you can be honest, you can. You know, as I said, it grew up as an engineering mindset company. I think it very much is still like engineering mindset, and the DNA of that company is you know the culture of like doing like build cool stuff and do what you need to do and figure it out. And I don't know, it seems like a cool place.
You're a very visionary guy and you make pretty bold predictions. You have sort of a set of predictions coming out of COVID. My mom's been calling me and telling me I got to go get my vaccination, and you know the world is going to be back to normal by Christmas. But I mean, from your chair, what do you think the world looks like as we come out of this?
You mentioned culture. You talked about VMware being cool, but you mentioned our campus. Well, true, the campus is very cool. We have turtles, but like I work at home now. I don't need a Zoom. Like putting a turtle on the Zoom meeting doesn't fix the culture, right? Like how do you? Because we sort of realize all those things at Office are amenities, but how do you replicate the actual culture down into the you know, your users sort of wherever you are? And that's a very hard thing, and I think we're sort of figuring it out as the industry altogether. The more important thing, forget COVID. I'm definitely a believer that what a lot of people have said, where COVID accelerated sort of like the whole world by like 10 years in terms of look at the numbers of people who buy things online and who, I mean, I'm using Instacart now. I've never used that before. I probably would have at some point in the next 10 years. You know, doing more meetings on Zoom and these kinds of things. That we were getting there slowly, but we got the big jump. We got 10 years of, you know, Zoom curve increase in a week and a half. Mm-hmm. And so to me, the big change, you know, certainly there are people based on what their personal preferences are and their housing situations. There are people who will want to go to the office every day as soon as they can. There are people who will want to work from home and never go to an office. And then there's people who are going to be in a hybrid, which I think I fall into. I would mostly rather work from home, but I'd love it if I could go to the office like one day a week and kind of hang with my team and, you know, other humans and have some camaraderie and that sort of thing. Because I do miss that.
And what do you think the future of events are, right? Given that you and I think when we actually would see each other would normally be at an event somewhere in the world. Do you think
Yeah, two things. So first of all, events will come back. Because I use myself as an example. I do not ever want to get on a plane again to like visit a customer, or like if you and I are going to interview like this, we don't need to be in the same room for this. I mean, this is fine. Right. And so that customer meetings, presentations, all that kind of stuff, I never want to travel for that. But events to me are worth it. IGEL Disrupt, for example, that's actually the last event I went to, the February 2021 in Nashville, I think, or no, Memphis. Nashville, yeah. That was my last event before COVID, I feel like events are going to come back. and are going to be popular because it's the chance, like it's a high multiplier of value from the effort of cost and flying and like getting there for 2-3 days. You see so many people, you interact, all that sort of thing.
I would
Yeah.
suggest that even when we go back to a physical event, we probably live in a world where it's a hybrid, right? You have the option of tuning into it. As an event person that has to think about this, in my mind, that's the option, right? You're going to expand your audience. We're doing a Disrupt next week. We'll have more people than we could ever have imagined, right? We're going to be approaching 5,000 people registered for this event. This is way more than we could have ever imagined as a physical event. So the reach is way higher. The historical artifacts are there immediately. So yeah, I agree with you. This is the future. But I guess
every event should be a hybrid event.
I would say I want to give you a hug, Brian, right? I miss the physical piece of it. I miss the beer, the conversations that happen where you learn about people, outside of, the four corners of a Zoom square, right? The human component.
And I think that I agree with everything you're saying. And I believe in my world, every event needs to be a hybrid event. And I would like, especially we've been, the other sort of, obviously one of the major cultural stories, at least in the US of 2020, was the new focus on, diversity and inclusion and exclusion and different barriers that different communities face. And I think we have to get, if it's me, I want every event, if it's a vendor event, make it free online. Make it free. Because there's some young kid, like there's some version of me who, like, why should we exclude that? And I'm fine, the people that want to go in person, they pay for it. And, maybe some of them are gonna be like, well, why should I pay for this event to go in person when I can just stay home and watch it online for free? And it's like, if you don't want to go in person and pay, then don't pay.
Right.
If you want to go in person, support the event, hug your friends, talk to the people more, in person. But everyone else should have the opportunity. VMworld, we had like 100,000 attendees at VMworld this year.
That's amazing.
The in-person VMworlds are only 20,000.
20,000, yeah. So that's crazy, 5x.
And why was that? Obviously, number one, you don't have to leave your house, and number two, it was free.
Yeah.
And it's great because now VMworld has like 900 breakout sessions. That's cool. I want to see 2. I'm not paying $2,000 for a virtual ticket to watch 2 hours of video. But if there's 2 sessions I want to watch, you can watch them. You can watch them later because they're on YouTube or.
Yeah, when I think this technology is going to get better too, right? We're in the sort of very 1.0 version of Zoom or whatever, right? We're going to start to see improvements here.
Exactly. And the analogy that I use with folks is look at television when it was first invented. Okay, so in the late 20s, early 30s, television comes out. They had to invent, the British had to invent television cameras and television sets and like radio transmit. They have to invent the whole system, right? And then they get it all. They get a television set in a house, and they're like, okay, wait, what do we put on this TV?
Right.
Oops. So they didn't know there had no content. So they just like pointed the TV cameras at the radio actors. Like the, trouble lurks in the shadows, and like the guy doing like the thunder with this thing and a little clapping. They pointed him at that. It's true, it's interesting, but it's not a TV show because they didn't know what to do. Same thing happened with Netflix. When Netflix first came out, every show was 22 minutes, boom, 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 boom. And it took time to understand the differences of that new medium. Benedict Evans very famously talks about how in the development of any technology, there's 2 phases. The first phase is figuring out what that technology looks like. And then the second phase is figuring out the impact on society of what happens once that technology has matured. Mm-hmm. So cars. The first 50 years of cars was, what does a car look like? How does it operate? The next 50 years of cars was, now that everyone has a car, what's that mean for society? Superhighways, suburbs, urban sprawl, inner cities, like Chili's, Best Buy, and Courtyard Marriott's. I mean, all of these things, right? Airplanes. First 50 years is figuring out, we got from the Wright brothers to a Boeing 707 in 50 years. The next 50 years was what happens when air travel is cheap and everyone can fly everywhere. Cell phones, right? Telephones. We took 50 years to get a glass rectangle. And now it's the next 50 years is what happens when everyone has a phone. Oh my gosh, we disrupted the taxi cab industries. We disrupted grocery stores. We disrupted everything. So the thing is that all of these tools we're using right now, even as we're connecting via Zoom and these kinds of things, we're trying to replicate the in-person office experience. And that is not the right model. I don't know what the right model is, but I know it's not this.
Right.
And we're seeing, like, look at the rapid iteration of Zoom and Microsoft, like with Teams. Look at all of these new collaboration, like Around, Aha, these are all real tools, but all these ones that everyone's trying to experimenting. It's very, very fascinating. It's like the early days of the automobile, where like some of them had a steering wheel on the left, some had a right, some had a hand accelerator, some was the pedal, some steered with the stick. It's like it's all just crazy town right now in all of these kinds of tools.
The good news is we have the bandwidth, we have the screens, we have the technology, and I think we have the intellect. I mean, that's the part that gives me great hope, is that, and we also have so many people that have, had to go live this way, that it becomes an addressable market that's ripe for disruption and innovation.
And the thing that's going to change also is, so we have to separate working from anywhere and pandemic. The pandemic caused us to have to go like working from anywhere, but when the pandemic will end, whether it's this year or in 5 years, it will end at some point. And then, but now the cat's out of the, smoke's out of the, I don't know, whatever. Now we've seen this remote world. It's going to have remote and working and hybrid and everything, and we're going to work on that. But all of this, like, see, my point is, a lot of people talk about Zoom is like with despair, like, like Zoom is not personal and I don't like it, and it's I'm drowning in my own loneliness, which we all, I mean, many of us, like me, yes, too. Like I'm not making light of that, but I'm saying that like Zoom is not the cause of our sadness right now. Like the pandemic is the cause. Like I haven't hugged another human since October.
Right.
Like that's
not healthy.
Literally true statement. And so so I mean, I was single going into the pandemic, right? So like, that's, had I known, maybe I would have made other life choices. But like, so the despair, if I want to, I'm gonna call it that, but the challenges of my life are going to go away when the pandemic sort of ends. My point is that people say, oh, you need the human interaction from work, and that's where I pause and I say, well, we all need the human interaction. I don't know that it has to be from work. Right? Like I want to, because you can't pick your coworkers. You can pick your friends, you pick your loved ones, you can sort of pick your neighbors, you can pick what social groups you hang out with and what hobby groups. I feel like that is where we're going to have this interaction. For me personally, I traveled all the time. That meant I couldn't do things. I couldn't sign up for any kind of classes, improv groups, because I'm on the road. I can't take an improv class because there's not 8 Monday nights in a row that I'm home.
Yeah, so
now
I have to ask you that question. Like, what are you doing to cope with the pandemic? Have you taken up any new hobbies, or you finished Netflix?
No, I'm not super. Yeah, I mean, I've got a Peloton, and so I'm like working out, indoors. And actually, you're a triathlon guy. I signed up for Chattanooga Ironman in September. So we'll see if that's...
I just watched the CEO of Ironman give a speech, and it was very like nebulous as to whether...
I was just going to say it was the perfect speech of someone who talked for 4 minutes and said nothing.
Exactly. You watched the same thing? I watched it. I thought...
Yeah. He just was like, well, we understand. It was crazy. Anyway,
my son has a football coach. They've been practicing since August. There may be a season. There may not be a season. There may be a season. It's sort of...
Yeah, and it's, because I traveled so much, all of the hobbies that I enjoyed pre-COVID were ones that I could do either from anywhere, or there are ones that I could do on my own time. So, I do a lot of like home repair type stuff. I got lots of home projects. I mean, gosh, building a studio was one of my pandemic projects, because I'm like, if I'm going to be home and not traveling, let's get like real lights, real camera, real bandwidth, and let's figure out how to do this like the real way and not like a blurry kind of webcam, that sort of thing. But the stuff, I mean, I've got pinball machines. I enjoy building, thinking about designing pinball, like play music. I do enjoy kind of being on stage for personal reasons, like doing stand-up comedy and improv and that kind of stuff. My stand-up routine actually was all about like work travel. And the foibles around traveling and everything. So like I need all new material now.
So where can we find your stand-up routine? Is it anywhere out on the internet?
No, it's not. I mean, I've got a few audio recordings from like when I'm on stage and just kind of hitting record and putting the phone in my pocket. I'm out on the internet in my in my work life all that I need.
Right.
So like I don't want to be a stand-up comic. I don't like I go to open mic nights with my friends and get on stage for 4 minutes and do my little sets. Like it's that kind of stuff, right? Because if again, it's going back to like the humble fisherman. I mean, like I don't want to be like, oh, you should work on this, you should work on this. Now trying to get a bigger. I'm like, oh, this is turning to work.
Right.
Like I'm just some dude telling jokes.
You're just having
fun. Yeah.
Well, Brian, I mean, it's been super fun to have you on this show. I know that there's a huge community that follows you that will watch this and loves you. And obviously, hopefully there's some younger generation coming up. I'd love for you to kind of give your parting words of advice to kind of the younger generation, right, that is trying to make their way into the world of technology.
The life advice I have now is take it out of technology. Even like you be you. Everyone who gets older tells younger people that. I'm gonna just hop onto it again. Like, do what you want to do, and damn the torpedoes. And so, if it's a younger person and you want to, like, whether it's how you get your name out there, whether it's the technology you're looking at, whether it's your interests, your hobbies, all that sort of stuff, do what you think you would enjoy, and other people will do it too. That's advice for giving a speech. Like, give the speech that you would want to listen to as an audience member. Write the blog post you would want to read as a blog post. Create, contribute to the world what you would want to get out of the world, and just give it a shot. We talk about imposter syndrome, and I had imposter syndrome like hardcore when I wrote my first book. I'm like, I am in no way like qualified to write a book, but I just figured out and.
Well, I think that is part of the ethos that we try to channel even at IGEL, right? We have this idea of believe. It really is like, hey, you can figure out how to do anything in this world, right? Stand on the shoulders of others, read a lot, research a lot. The internet's an amazing thing. You can be in your car and ask Siri anything, and they start to give you some of the answers. So yeah, I think this is part of the foundation of doing anything great, right, is to believe that you can do that and have the imagination and the willpower to believe.
Yeah, don't be needy to get the acceptance of others, right? If someone else doesn't like what you're doing, who cares, right? Do you like what you're doing? Go for it. As long as what you're doing is not like hurting anyone or like causing damage in the world, go nuts. You be you.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for giving us, being so generous with your time. I obviously look forward to a moment when we're able to share a beer together and give you a hug. But until then, thank you very much. And we'll have to continue to watch your blogs and look for your different ways that you're out there on the internet. It looks like you do have a great studio. You're coming through very crisp. So
thank you.
Good job on that. So thank you. Always a fun roller coaster. And one thing I do love about you, Brian, is that you're authentic. And so thank you so much. And look forward to seeing you out somewhere in this world.
Yeah, awesome, Jed. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and good to see you virtually, and I look forward to that hug.
And for all our listeners, thank you for stopping by The Attic. We're really excited about some of the upcoming guests, such as Tim Minahan, the CMO of Citrix, David Smith, the CEO of Teradici, and of course, the industry godfather and IGEL's new executive chairman, Bill Vdi. And there's a host of other influential leaders, specifically within EUC and in tech in general. Lots of interesting perspectives coming soon on this video podcast. So please subscribe to the IGEL YouTube channel down below, and you'll get all the alerts about when the next episodes will drop. And until we meet again, this is Ayres wishing you a great day, be kind to each other, and be well.